official welcome from Nyjah. Rebecca.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on data sovereignty, storytelling, through numbers and evaluation. My name is Rebecca Horschie. I am Osage from Oklahoma, and I am the program coordinator for the National American Indian Court Judges Association. I'll be moderating today. We want this to be an interactive experience, so please feel free to ask questions throughout. Make use of the chat feature and answer the polls as they pop up throughout the webinar. Today we have Kate Trujillo and Melissa Sigmund, and I'll turn it over to them for their introductions.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Trujillo, and I am a program coordinator at NAICJA as well. And I have a master's in public health from the University of Michigan, and have done a lot of data and measurement and evaluation, program evaluation. So I am coming to you guys from Boulder, Colorado today.
And I'm Melissa Sigmund. I'm the director at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges Research Division. We're located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and go by the name of the National Center for Juvenile Justice. I've been an employee of the council here at the center since 1986, so I've been doing number stuff for a long, long time. I hope that folks will get what they want out of this, and by all means, please do use the chat stuff. Kate, do you want to switch to the first slide?
Yes, there we go. All right. So to tell you guys a little bit more about NAICJA and what we do. So NAICJA is a national association. Our membership base is primarily tribal court judges as well as personnel, and really more than anything what we focus on is providing education and resources and training and technical assistance to build the capacity of tribal court systems. So we work one-on-one with judges, we work one-on-one with court systems, we work one-on-one with the social services that work around courts, and really do kind of anything that we can to really strengthen tribal courts. So that might include doing bench books, helping to start integrating more traditional practices into the court. So we do a really, really broad range of things. We do things like this webinar, as well as run a couple of different websites that just provide more resources and really try and connect judges and tribal court personnel around the nation.
And the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges is very similar to that. We've been around, actually I should have changed this slide, we're almost 82 now. We also are training judges and other personnel who are in, non-judicial roles or allied agencies, service providers. We're doing work to help the folks that do juvenile and family court business do what they do better. And we have had, for many years now, an established working relationship with NAICJA, so we're happy to join with you on this webinar and other things throughout the year. Where I work in Pittsburgh is the National Center for Juvenile Justice. We're not quite as old as the council, and our work over the years has been, completely focused on doing research and collecting data and presenting statistics on the work of juvenile and family courts. Most of our work, I think, historically is focused on juvenile justice, so you'll see some of the examples that I'll be giving come from that world. But our goal really has been to help the courts and connected agencies do what they do better through using data, and we provide a lot of technical assistance around data and evaluation type issues. Research and data often puts people off. It sounds really complicated and hard, and it's just storytelling in a different way, telling stories with numbers, and so we take a lot of pride in trying to make something that sounds very complex, not give you a headache. And I hope that we'll do that a little bit today.
All right, so to get started, I just wanted to start off with a couple of basic definitions. For those of you that are currently working, if you work in data and evaluation stuff already, some of the stuff will probably be overview, but I think it's important to kind of remember where we are on when we're talking about data and evaluation and measurement. So first things first, what are evaluation and measurement? So measurement, more than anything, it's just a tool, and it helps us track the progress that we've made to see if something is working or not working, and to really see like how far we've come with something. And so, you know, there's no single way to really measure something. If, for example, I wanted to know, you know, how many people on this conference had a cup of coffee this morning or something along those lines. You know, we could type something into the chat box and have everybody say yes or no. We could put up a poll. I could have you go and take pictures of your coffee cups. All those are different ways to measure what we're trying to get at. And so it gives us a count and a general answer to the question that we're asking. You know, and measurement can also be done verbally. It can be, if we're talking about, you know, measuring somebody's satisfaction. If we decide not to use numbers, there's also, you know, we can also do it through interviews and just asking, you know, are you satisfied? And tell us a little bit more about, you know, your level of satisfaction with something. And then what evaluation does is it takes those numbers and it takes those measures and it turns them into something that helps us tell this story that we're talking about. And so it really, you know, it helps us try and figure out, based off of those measurements, what is going well and how can we improve it? How can we make sure that we're not causing harm and that our program is doing the best that it can do? Where do we have room to grow, and kind of where can we go from here? So that's the overall goal of evaluation. And, you know, really more than anything, like Melissa was saying, you know, I think people tend to be a little bit scared when we mention data, tend to be a little bit scared when you mention evaluation and measurement. And really, you know, it's something that doesn't have to be so hard, and it's something that, you know, every organization can do, and it's just, where do you start? And it's helping to figure out those answers. So just a few examples. So if we wanted to know what training method did you find most helpful? You have a program and you're running multiple trainings. You're running, you know, webinars, you're running videos, you're running in-person trainings, you know, and you want to know what training method do people like the most. So there's a couple different ways that you can measure that. You could send out an open-ended survey and just have, you know, people write in their answers. You could ask people in person when they're coming into your program. You could send out a multiple choice questionnaire, and all of those are perfectly valid ways to do measurements. You know, an open-ended survey gives people the opportunity to, you know, say what they want to say, and if they want to expand on something, and you know, it allows them to write their own opinion. Whereas a multiple choice questionnaire is, you know, it's a prescribed list of things that you have to choose from, and so, you know, a multiple choice questionnaire may or may not be a little bit more exact depending on the answer that you're the question that you're asking. But all of those are perfectly good ways to measure something. And then we take those measurements and we see that, okay, 85% of people listed that they like the one-on-one training the best. They found that the most helpful. And only 9% listed that they liked the pre-recorded videos that you had. So, you know, you recorded a video and then you left it up on a website or sent it out, and that was, you know, the method of training that you used. And really only 9% of people really liked that. And then 6% of people really just didn't have much of a preference. They were just kind of like, I'll take whatever method I can get. I like them all. Or I don't like any of them. And that's a whole different question. But, and so, and based off of that data, we look at a couple of things and we can say that, okay, we clearly want to keep the one-on-one trainings because clearly a lot of people really like those, and maybe we start to offer them a little bit more frequently. And then we look at this 9% listed with the pre-recorded videos, and really that's a pretty low number. And so we really need to think about, are we spending our resources in the best way? You know, if a lot of work goes into those pre-recorded videos and nobody really likes them all that much, maybe we should consider redirecting some of those resources towards, you know, doing different programming, or towards really strengthening some more of those one-on-one training, some more of those in-person trainings, and seeing where we can expand that. You know, and a question like this would be a really good place to then follow up on, you know, on these questions, and, you know, figure out if there was a specific issue that people didn't like the pre-recorded videos. You know, maybe the formatting was off, or maybe they were too hard to get into. You know, there's a bunch of different reasons why somebody might not like a pre-recorded video. And so, you know, that's something that you would definitely want to investigate a little bit more. And that is definitely something that can be done through an open-ended survey or through in-person interviews. So those are just a couple of examples of what we're talking about when we're talking about measurement and evaluation. So overall, we want to figure out why do we want to evaluate. And like I've been saying, you know, an evaluation is really a way for us to tell the story of our program and tell the story of what's going on, and really figure out what's going on, what's working, and what's not working. And so it really helps us, it demonstrates our program's success if we can show that, you know, before this program, X number of people were experiencing this, and after this program, only Y number of people were experiencing this. And so you can really see the success of a program when you take a step back and do a larger evaluation. One of the things that I think often happens, I've just spent a lot of time working in social services, and one of the things that we tend to lose track of is because we're constantly inundated with, you know, things that don't feel like a very big success. You tend to lose the light at the end of the tunnel, and you tend to forget that, you know, overall, when you step back and you look at the number of people that you reached out to and that you know, helped in any given year, then you're like, wow, okay, this is why I do my job. This is awesome. And so really, evaluation can be really good for both, you know, showing the program's success to funders, but also really helping your employees and really helping the people who are close to you understand and be motivated in what they do. It definitely helps us make sure we're doing more good than harm. You know, Melissa's gonna delve into a couple of examples of, you know, why that's so important, because I think everybody who starts a program is doing it, you know, more or less with really good intentions, but we don't actually know something's working until we can measure the success. We can think that it's working, but we don't actually know. And some programs have unintended consequences that, you know, you would have never thought about. And so it's important in that sense to make sure that you're doing evaluations. The next thing it does is it really helps your program from making the same mistakes over and over. After an evaluation, you'll see what's working and what's not working. And so it really helps you be more efficient in the work that you're doing and identify where you can improve and where you can grow, where you should put maybe a little bit more research, and where maybe you should back off a little bit. And the other thing that is really important that we're just going to keep hitting on while we're on this webinar is really data and evaluation and doing a measurement and having all of this power behind you. Really, it helps you tell your own story, and it helps you tell it how you want it told. So if you own the data and if you own your evaluations and you're doing it, you can really tell your story how you want it told of your program. And so that's really important, and that's a point that we're definitely going to hit on, is that, you know, there's a lot of power that comes behind data and that comes behind having an evaluation. And, you know, if you can do that for your program, it really helps you tell your own story. And then, of course, you know, there's always the funding. Funders want to know whether or not something's working. You know, and that's part of telling your own story and owning your data, is that you can show that, you know, yes, like maybe this part of my program didn't work so well, but geez, look at this part. This part was awesome. And, you know, you can really help craft that story and really hopefully get yourself some more funding.
That's excellent. I'm going to talk a little bit about, just give some examples of what might happen when we don't use data and evaluation to guide our programs. The first example that I'm going to give, I don't know how old everyone is, but if you remember anything about the mid-1990s, or actually from the mid-80s to the mid-90s in terms of juvenile crime, there was sort of a big surge in the measures that we had of violence, and there was a lot of fear around the country. And some people had put out the idea that what we needed to do was to have midnight basketball so that kids were not out on the streets at night. Instead, they would have something to do with some supervision, which sounds like a reasonable idea. And there's maybe nothing wrong with midnight basketball. Schools or gyms aren't being used late at night otherwise. So if it didn't cost a lot of money, maybe this is an okay idea. But we did some analysis and looked at data on when kids were committing crimes. And what we saw was that, you know, most of the time, which for kids, that's times when they should be in school days, the peak time for them to be committing crime and also to be victim of crime is right after school, not late at night. On the weekends, there was a little bit of late at night peaking, but it wasn't midnight. It was more like 8:30, 9 o'clock. So if you really wanted to have a big impact on kids committing crime and being the victim of crime, you wouldn't want to have that midnight basketball. You'd want to have something focused in those peak hours. So extending services or team sports or activities in school buildings after the end of the school day, perhaps, instead. And when we published this graph, people started thinking about it differently, and I think some of the midnight basketball programs went away, and people started focusing on developing after-school programs and activities for kids. Because if I have limited resources, limited dollars, I want to spend them where they're going to make the biggest bang for the buck. Another example has to do with Scared Straight programs, and this is still a television program, I think, on A&E, talking about they have various jails and prisons. It started with a program in Rahway, New Jersey at the state prison there, and somebody had the brilliant idea of, oh, let's take kids into a prison and show them how bad it is in prison, show them how tough and mean prisoners are, have the prisoners yell at them and scare them so that they won't misbehave in the future. The trouble is, Scared Straight programs don't work. They often result in an increase in the criminal behavior of the kids exposed to them, and sometimes there's additional trauma created so that there isn't this reduction in recidivism. It may actually have the reverse effect. So again, here's a they still exist all around the country, and I'm real old, so I can remember watching the Andy Griffith show on TV and Andy putting Opie into the jail next to Otis the drunk to show him, that he should behave. This is not really a good idea most of the time. But it could create some harm because some of the kids, not only did they have more offending in the future, but some of the kids were very traumatized. So we don't want to create a thing that might work for some people but could create harm for other people. The idea of using data to guide programs, I'm going to give an example from some work that some of my staff here have been doing. There's a court in Ohio that was really curious about what was going on with their referrals to court. They were seeing a little bit of information that they had these ups and downs and wanted to know more about it. But they didn't have a lot of good information in their court information system, so they decided to just kind of informally keep track outside that information system, and they created a spreadsheet in Excel software, and they started counting not only the number of referrals, but information about why the child was referred to juvenile court. And what they found out was that the most common reason kids came was disorderly conduct, almost half. Most of the disorderly conduct referrals that came to the court, though, were handled unofficially. The child was given a warning and then was released back to their family. They weren't locked up. It was, you know, kind of like a parent might do to stop doing that. And what they realized that most of these referrals were coming to the court from the school, and so they started a discussion with the school superintendents about, are there ways that the schools can have more effective responses to those behaviors in school so that they don't have to send the kids to juvenile court. The focus of our work in the county and in other jurisdictions around the country, we sort of use the tagline, we want to keep kids in school and out of court. But if they hadn't been able to look in a little more detail at the data, at the referrals that they were getting from schools to see really what was going on, it would have been a much harder conversation for them to have with the schools to try to figure out, you know, what's going on and what needs to change. So I want to sort of show a little story here, with a little pretty tree picture to look at. The story goes that many centuries ago there was an emperor of China, and he wandered out of the palace and into his forest and found this beautiful, strong, giant oak tree. He marveled at its beauty, the shade that it provided, the abundant life it supported. He sat under it for a long, long time. When he returned to the palace, he called his trusted advisors together and explained that he wanted a giant oak like the one he had seen in the forest, and he wanted it in the middle of the palace courtyard for everyone to enjoy. His advisors looked at one another in disbelief, and finally one asked, with all due deference and respect, "Emperor, do you know how long it takes to grow a tree like that?" "No," replied the emperor. "How long?" "Centuries," was the answer. "It takes centuries." And the emperor pondered and then replied, "Well, we had better plant it right away." And I'm telling this story because it's sort of an analogy in building information systems and data, thinking about evaluation. Often people think, "Well, I can't do that. It's too hard. It's going to take forever. I can't get there." And we would say, well, plant the seed right now, because you will never get there if you don't take that first step. So I'd like everybody to sort of think about themselves and their own organization or community's data capacity and sort of question, am I like a mighty oak? Am I more like a sapling? I'm, you know, a few years in growth, halfway there? Or am I needing to plant a seed? I'm just like the acorn waiting to be planted. We'll give you a little chance to actually think about it and to answer it. Jessica, can you do the poll? So click on whether you think you're a mighty oak or a sapling or the seed waiting to be planted. I have to check on that. We'll broadcast the results here. So it looks like people are thinking they're kind of in the middle. Anybody else want to respond? So we have most people saying that they're a sapling and a few people saying that they're a seed to be planted, which I think is pretty typical. There's, in my experience, when we talk with juvenile courts all around the country, there's a lot of variation, and there's a few places, a few agencies that are sort of shining stars, and most people are sort of in the middle. You can use the chat room if you want to give us some feedback, but what do you think of if you think of one small improvement that that you could make to improve your data capacity? What could you do if you need to plant the seed or if you're a sapling to provide some nourishment? Yes, or Jessica says you can unmute your phone if you want to just say it in words out loud. Anyone? Don't be shy. We'll throw up some educate peers. I like that. We have any people on the phone that are, or on the webinar that are really sort of more data geeks like I am? We'll throw out another question too. What is something that you wish you knew about your community or your work or your jurisdiction, your program, what you're doing, that you don't really know now? And what is a way that you could measure it? And I was curious, knowing that BJA was, sort of paying for this. Are there performance measures that are really challenging for people? If you're using federal money, you have to let them know how things are going, and there's always the required performance measures. Are there things that are always hard or that don't really apply? I know when we talk with people that are getting funding from a sister agency of BJA, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, sometimes people get really frustrated with completing the performance measures. And is there anything there that what you're doing isn't being captured by those performance measures? And what might that be? How could it be measured? I don't really know in their system whether there's a way to put in additional information. But if you have questions, I think both of our organizations can provide some help in doing that. And I'll turn it back over to Kate and let her talk a little bit more about how to do it better.
Okay. Let's see here. So we got somebody who said, consult and continue the work that our elders have initiated, but with a new modernized approach.
Okay, that's a good one.
That is a goal right there. I like it. And so on that note, we're going to talk a little bit more about goal setting and objectives to make evaluation and measurement on the back end a lot easier. So one of the things when we're talking about programming, at least, is we want to try and make SMART goals and objectives. So SMART is an acronym, and we're talking about goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So if we follow these guidelines, it makes our evaluation and measurement on the back end much, much easier. And it will also make our program a lot more efficient because we'll have a better idea of what it is we're actually trying to accomplish. So we're talking about specific. So we want something that is clear and concise. So we want something that clearly states the goal. So really anybody who's reading it can understand. So that helps us understand, what exactly we are trying to accomplish, what will be done, and who is going to do it. So we want a goal that's specific. The next one is measurable. So we want to have an action or an action that can be measured so that we can track our progress. So this, of course, is the part of a goal that will help us determine whether or not we're making progress, and it'll also help us know if we're keeping on track, if we're keeping on schedule with what we're trying to do. So the next one is achievable. So we want a goal that makes sense for what we're doing. We want it to be realistic given the circumstances that you have. So this is where we get ourselves in trouble with these pie-in-the-sky goals of, we want to change the world, and that's a great goal. But how do we measure that, and where do we start with it? So we want something that's going to be difficult, but also achievable, something that's going to be realistic given the time constraints, given the circumstances, and given, what we have to work with. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about achievable. Next is we want something that's relevant. So we want something that fits the purpose of the problem that we're trying to solve, that logically makes sense, of course. But we also are talking about relevant in terms of, is it relevant for the community? Is it relevant for the population that you're working with? And is it relevant to the things with the circumstances that you have at hand? It's great to set a goal, but if it's not achievable given the circumstances, then it's not really relevant to that community. So that's something that we always want to approach and really think about. Does this make sense for what we're trying to accomplish, and does it make sense for the community that we're working with? The last one is time-bound. So this, definitely if you're working on a grant, things are always time-bound. But it should be more than, we want to achieve this goal by the end of 2020. Let's think of objectives and little steps that we can take in between now and 2020 so that we give ourselves a schedule and so that we can keep ourselves on track. How much can we accomplish by this date? How much can we accomplish by this next date? And so having all of those things together provides goals and objectives that are smart and make them much easier to evaluate, but also a lot easier to follow, and really kind of keep people on track and understand what their role in this specific program is. So a couple of examples. So, we had this pie-in-the-sky goal of we want to decrease the wait times in our courtroom. That's a great goal, but it doesn't really give us any information. When do we want to do it by, and how are we going to do it, and what does it mean to decrease? Are we talking from 30 minutes to 29 minutes, or are we talking from an hour to 15 minutes? What is the measure that we're using here? What does decrease mean? And so we look at the next example of what does this look like when it's a SMART goal. So here we see over the next 30 days, we want to decrease wait times by 25% in our courtroom by allowing the front desk and court clerk to check in patient IDs and case files immediately upon check-in. And so if you look at the second example of what it looks like to be SMART, we have within the next 30 days, so there's our time bound, and we want to decrease it by 25%. So it's measurable, and it's specific because we're talking about how we want to do it. We say by allowing the front desk and court clerk to check in patient IDs. So we have it pinpointed who's going to be doing what. And it's relevant to the population that we're working with because we're working in the courtroom. And so having court clerks check patient IDs and have things that they're allowed to do, that makes a lot of sense for this goal. And so this you can see is a SMART goal because it lays out all of those different aspects. And so when we're looking at it, if someone were to read this goal, they would clearly understand what we want to accomplish, when we want to accomplish by, and what accomplishment means, and who's going to do it, and how we're going to do it. So all of that can be wrapped into a goal. Another example is we want to make our court more trauma-informed. Again, that's a great goal, and it's something that definitely needs to be done, but that doesn't give us any information. That we don't know where to start when we look at that goal. And so when you look at the SMART goal, says, we will have a trauma assessment performed on our court and will develop a trauma task force by September 2019. The task force will create a 3-year plan in response to the assessment, and 100% of court staff will be trained on trauma responses by December 2020. So this one, although a little bit longer, it also is a very SMART goal. So we know, we want to make our courtroom more trauma-informed by doing X, Y, and Z. So we're going to have a trauma assessment performed, and we know it's going to happen by September 2019. We're going to develop a trauma task force that's also going to be developed by September 2019. And they're going to create a 3-year plan. So what are they going to do to help make sure that we become more trauma-informed? They're going to create this 3-year plan that will be in response to the assessment. And we're going to have 100% of court staff trained on trauma by December 2020. And so that lays out the time, what success means, what steps are being taken, and who's doing what. And so those are examples of SMART goals that on the back end will make evaluation and measurement a lot easier, and will, as we're going through the program, will make it a lot easier for us to stay on track, to understand what we're doing, and to really make sure that we are staying on task and working towards the same goal. So now that we have our goals and objectives, we think about when we're starting the evaluation, we think about what are we really trying to do? What are the important things to remember? And so, we always go back to 3 things. We're talking about the goals, the process, and the problem. So we're talking about what are we trying to accomplish, and how are we going to accomplish this thing, and what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Why does this program exist in the first place? And one of the things that I think is pretty common that I have heard very often is that when you ask somebody the problem that they're trying to accomplish, they'll instead give them the goal. They'll answer with their goal. And those are 2 different answers, because in order to have a good goal, we have to really understand what it is we're trying to affect and what it is we're trying to make an impact on. And so that's when we're talking about what is the problem, why does your program exist? Not what it's trying to accomplish, but what is it trying to, why does it exist in the first place? Why do we need to try and accomplish this? So this is a deeper understanding of really what is your program truly trying to get at, and what is it trying to affect. So when we're talking about measurement through that program, we are looking at, again, are we making progress at all? Is our program working towards that goal that we're talking about? Are the methods that we have identified, are those working? And if they are, why? Because that will help us understand and grow our program further. It can also help us inform other programs that are happening. If we have a method that's going on in one place and we want to know why it's working, and somebody else wants to develop a similar program, we need to know why is our program working so we can help give that advice. And then we also want to know if something's not working, why it's not working, because then we don't repeat our own mistakes. And again, then we want to know, are we reaching who we want to reach? So is this program relevant? Is this evaluation relevant? Are we working with the population that we want to? We might have set out to reach one population, and then we ended up reaching out to somebody totally different. So we're not actually making an impact, but it's not our stated goal. So that's an important thing to know. And then one thing that evaluation really can help us do is figure out if there's anything else going on that might be influencing, positive or negative, the progress that we're making. So is there something else in the community that's happening that, maybe we can work with, or that maybe is holding us back from being more successful? So when we think about this, we can think about, say that you have a program that's working to reduce substance abuse in your region. And, then 3 months into your program, a new clinic opens up next to your program. And that's clearly going to impact the services that you offer, because if they offer something like medication-assisted treatment, and they have a larger reach than your program does, then maybe you don't need to also offer medication-assisted treatment. Maybe you can offer something else. So figuring out how to work within the community that you are running this program, and figuring out how to work with the different resources that are around and how those resources are going to impact your program can be really helpful and can really inform the success of your program.
So we're going to shift a little bit into more of a data discussion. We talk all the time with folks running programs and in courts about turning data into information and knowledge to inform your decisions and make change or improvements. The fear is often around the data, and I try to tell people, you know, we don't need more data. What we need is better information. Sometimes we have an information system that is capturing a lot of little bits and pieces. A lot of numbers get collected, but nobody is really making good use of it. So they're not taking that data and giving it some structure to turn it into information. They're not then taking the information and the knowledge that they have about what it means to really create some new knowledge, and then applying that knowledge to make recommendations, decisions about what should happen differently to make things better. But it all has to start with the data elements that are being collected. If your information or the data that's being collected is done in a sloppy way or is not accurate, or different people doing it understand what they're supposed to be doing differently, you may have a really hard time. But you're going to then turn those numbers into information by organizing it and analyzing it so that you can begin to understand the story that the data are telling you. We want to be able to rely on all that to make decisions. So I put together sort of a weird little just sort of example for those of you that are afraid of the numbers part, if that's anyone. Here's a bunch of numbers. They represent a person ID, a gender code, and a program score. So if we look at, there's numbers at the beginning that are the ID, and then the digits next are the gender, and then what's in the yellow in that is the program score. And if we look at it, so we start to turn it into information that there were 10 program participants today. Of the 10 participants, 70% were female. So now we can, we are understanding what those codes mean. So the ones are females, the twos are males. We are evidently not having any other gender options other than that. So there were 30% were males. Of the 10 participants, 5 obtained a program score of 9. So 50% got a program score of 9, which that's a little bit better in terms of some information, but we're not really, it's not really giving us knowledge. But we can say, oh, so more than half of the program participants were females. The mean program score was 8. Half of the participants had a program score of 9. And females were more likely than males to have a program score of 9. But one of the big things that's missing here is, what does that 9 mean? Is it 9 out of 10? Is it 9 out of 100? Is having a high score better or low score better? What, if this were actual program information, we would know about what that program score really meant. If it was a test that the people were given and they got answers right or wrong, we would be able to say a lot more about it. And then, then we might start asking questions sort of along the lines that Kate was talking about before. Well, why were the females more likely than males to have a program score that was a 9, higher, maybe better? And what do we need to think about to get males to have better responses? We can play around with that for a long, long time. The program that has this would be ready to be evaluated if they, again, have that, they know what their purpose is, so very similar to what Kate was talking about. We would like to see that there's a strategy to the program, that there's some underlying theoretical or research basis for why you think this program is going to have the intended impact. Oftentimes people think of like if we go back to the idea of midnight basketball, well, it seemed like it would make sense, so that maybe is not enough of a strategy. A structure to it, most programs, they need to have a documented process and procedures so that if the people that are implementing the program change, it can be done the same way with new people. If there's 5 people doing it, they can all do it the same way so that there can be staff training and that it can be applied consistently. The programs that are based on a theoretical or research understanding of like behavior change, the documented process is going to also make sure that they are following what the theory would say with some fidelity, so doing it the right way. The delivery needs to be supported with training and supervision, again, to make sure that things are being done the proper way. And then there has to be documentation of the implementation and measurement of the outcomes so that you can see whether it's all going according to plan. We talk with people a lot about something called continuous quality improvement, which is sort of a close sister of evaluation, but it's a cyclical process of assessing performance and coming up with implementation improvement plans and then reassessing the results. And so it's sort of a continuous thing. It's not a one-time thing. The intent of continuous quality improvement is to constantly strive to be reaching for the best possible outcomes through data-informed decision-making. Organizations that adopt a CQI kind of principled approach make conscious commitment to not only collect specific and meaningful information, very much along the lines of what Kate was talking about, but also to learn from it and make improvements to routine practices as necessary. So we talk about this a lot with justice system organizations, and justice system organizations can use CQI in multiple ways to help quantify and describe their services, to engage in data-informed decision-making at various levels of the system, and to monitor progress towards program or department goals. If you want to make improvement, you're going to essentially be going through a continuous quality improvement process. You need to collect data, gather information that's data that are accurate and reliable and directly related to that defined goal. So the SMART goals that Kate was talking about, you need to analyze, review the data to see if the benchmarks are being met. So that goal that she was talking about, the 25% shortened wait time, did you make it to 25%? If you didn't make it to 25% in the 30 days, what needs to happen to get there? And then react from it. So come up with an action plan to address the shortcomings. Perhaps the strategy of letting them check in right away wasn't enough. What else needs to change in order to be able to reach that goal? And again, it's not a one-time thing. It's sort of a change in the way you think about things. It's a shift in culture so that the day-to-day functioning of the organization changes to always be improving upon what's happening today. And I think we see that agencies and programs are often asked to collect lots of different types of information, such as the number of referrals or the level of risk or identified needs. what kinds of services did clients receive, and this information can be used to inform improvements and is intended to move the organizations closer to reaching their goals. It sounds a lot like a lot of the BJA performance measures, and I think there's a reason for that, because BJA doesn't want to be giving out money and not have things getting, improvements made and having people be able to use the information to make improvements. It's not just to justify your existence, but it's supposed to, I think, also be helpful. Good decisions can only be made with data that are accurate and reliable, and we sort of, can coach through, series of sort of questions that you could ask yourself, have the data collection tools been used uniformly? Have the data collection plans been followed? Have enough data been collected to feel confident for using that for decisions? And is there any reason to doubt the accuracy of the data? If you can say, yes, all those things are true, then you're kind of ready to really start with the quality improvement process. The essential steps to really get ready to launch into a CQI process involves commit, focus, and describe. When an organization decides to adopt a CQI process, they need to commit to the process. They need to focus on a specific goal, a specified goal. They need to clearly describe the services and outcomes. And once the organization has addressed these areas, the cycle of collecting data, analyzing it, and reacting to it can begin and is more likely to be effective and sustained. The commitment can be shown through the formulation of a CQI team, which might be a multidisciplinary team depending on your organization, sharing the vision of the continuous quality improvement process throughout the organization, devoting specific time and resources to the process. It's not just enough for some person, maybe the person in charge, to say, okay, we're doing this and nothing else. You have to really have strong organizational leadership and commitment to it. It's possible to apply the principles to various levels of practice, so to a single intervention, to a broader program, or to an entire organization. It's very valuable to consider existing data sources, such as annual reports or strategic plans, information you're collecting already. But you might need to add additional things, but you have to decide where to focus, so the information you have readily in hand can be very informative in terms of deciding what the focus will be initially. The CQI team should clearly specify the ultimate goal for the CQI efforts and share the goal with the entire organization. And before beginning to collect data, it's important to identify the purpose of the selected target area of improvement. When identifying the purpose, the CQI team should take into account the targeted population, the planned activities, and the anticipated outcomes. Just like Kate was saying, there could be outside influences and stuff, and shifting target population is something that we see a lot, where you intend for something to be applied to a certain group, and somehow it ends up being a different group. So when we look through the whole process, you have collecting data based on those measurable objectives, those SMART goals, and creating a data collection plan and following it, checking the quality of the data, looking to see if those benchmarks have in fact been met, looking at those prioritized areas for improvement, thinking if they're not met, brainstorming possible reasons why they were not met, coming up with an improvement strategy, an action plan, as it were, of what you're going to do next to try to achieve change, implement those improvement strategies, continue to monitor performance, and you just keep doing it and doing it. If you're finding that you're meeting your goals, you can then shift to a new focus area or set higher standards. So instead of like the 25% reduction, another 25, or some other metric along the way to reach some 100% goal. It's that continuous process that is, it grows and changes if you do this over the course of many years, but it allows sort of this continuous feedback that also prevents what I would call backsliding, which is also very useful. Sometimes when programs maybe achieve some goal, there's sort of a moment of relaxation, and then things may sort of begin to fall apart. And a continuous quality improvement process sort of prevents that from happening because you're always looking at it, so it doesn't ever go away. We have been involved with developing very specific measures for juvenile justice. We got a project from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention called the Juvenile Justice Model Data Project. They wanted us to come up with data elements and measures for everything, for the entire juvenile justice system, from the very first moment a kid touches the justice system at law enforcement, usually through reentry back to the community. And they were crazy. We were crazy to say yes, but we started with very broad. These are not really SMART goals yet, but if you think of juvenile justice system's goal or part of the vision statement, to hold youth accountable, to be fair, to prevent reoffending. So what data are needed to track whether the system is meeting those goals? We came up with sort of, as a way to think of it, because it was so huge, a set of 10 goals, measures, questions that need to be answered. And in a way, in doing that, we sort of realized that there's sort of three ways of thinking about this. One is to just count how much of stuff is going on, so how many kids were involved at various points in the system. What was the system's response? So how, were things happening? What was the timeliness? Was there equity involved? What was the system's response? And then results in terms of what were the ways in which the youth changed both while they were in the system and after their involvement, as sort of three big ways to think about it. We came up with the 10 questions that we thought needed to be able to be answered, that all the measures we came up with fit someplace under these 10 things. And the counting, so how many kids are involved at the various stages of the system, and what are their key characteristics of demographics and that sort of thing. How did they become involved with the system? How do they move through the system, which begins to get at the system's response in terms of how long does it take, and how many kids, if you think of the system as a set of sort of decision filters, how many kids move past each decision and penetrate the system further? Is the system fair? So that's getting a little bit at the system response and whether things are applied equitably. How did the kids change when they went through the system? Is it meeting their needs and the needs of their families? What was the experience of the youth while in the system? How much does it cost? What are the long-term measures of success? A lot of these things do involve way detailed elements in terms of how to measure things. And one of the most important data elements, I might go back to one here because it's more connected with here, how did they move through the system, which gets back to the point that Kate was making about having things be time-bounded. We find that dates, knowing when things start and when they end, is so important and is often handled in a really sloppy way, where often today's date gets put in when it really was something that happened, a month ago or a week ago or couple days ago, that, keeping track of the dates to know the time for different things. So if a program has different stages, it's important to know not just the beginning and the end, but the different stages that one would go through to know dates there. Anyway, so those 10 questions, which I think you can probably, and we have a slide later that will show how to think of those in a more general way, not for just the juvenile justice system, but how to think about similar questions applied to programs in general. Let me go back to, whoops, I'm missing my clicker here. And now, Kate, you have an example here that's more for a TA type of thing?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, and so one of the things that a lot of times we get questions on is, okay, this all sounds great, but how do we actually track things? How do we actually come up with a survey? How do we get all this data started with? And so here on the screen you'll see just a really basic example of what NAICJA uses for our training and technical assistance. So we do evaluations at the end of any session that we do because we want to know, are we doing a good job? Are we doing the things that we should do? And these were developed to mirror a lot of the questions that the BJA also asks because we work under the BJA. And so this was a guide that we developed to help us know if we were doing a good job, but also help us report out to the BJA so that they have the metrics that they want. And so when you think about tracking, we want something that's simple and understandable. So we want that on both ends. We want something that's simple and understandable for the people that are doing the survey. And then we want something that is simple and understandable for us when we get it back, because we don't want to pour a bunch of time into trying to decode whatever it is we just asked. Is it something that's relevant? Does it make sense for the training that we're doing? It doesn't make sense to, ask if the audio and visual content was good if there's not any audio and visual content to be good. And so we want to make sure that we're asking relevant questions. Is it something that's useful? Is it something that's useful for us as an organization to improve our own training? And is it something that's useful for our funders? Are we answering the questions that they're going to be asking us? Is it something that's going to be impactful? Can we actually make a change when we get these back? Is it something that's going to inform us in our future work, or is it just something that we're measuring just to measure? You definitely can run into the situation where you have all of this data, but you don't know what to do with it. It doesn't actually mean anything. People just ask questions to ask questions, but we don't want to waste our resources doing that. So let's figure out if the questions that we're asking are going to be impactful. And also, are we asking it in a way that it's measurable? Here on the survey, you'll see that we have a rating scale of 1 to 5. And as Melissa was talking about earlier, we have clearly specified with 1 being not at all, 3 being somewhat, and 5 being fully supporting the statement. And so we need to make sure that those measures are included so that when people are taking the survey, they know, is 1 low or is it 1 high? What number is it out of? And so that for us, when we're processing these and when someone looks at this, we could say the average answer was, 4.9 out of 5. So we need to make sure that we specify those things because that really frames what we're talking about. And things that are necessary for tracking technical assistance, especially with the BJA, is they want to know attendance. So how many people were there? So we have, when we do our training and technical assistance, we also have just a really simple attendance sheet that we pass around, and we ask for somebody's name and their organization or affiliation. And then if they want to provide us with contact information, email, phone number for follow-up, we always welcome that as well. But that serves dual purpose. It helps us answer our BJA questions of how many people were there? Were they federal or non-federal? Were they federal employees who were there? And that will be answered when they write in, I am a federal or non-federal employee. And so that is really helpful for us in answering the BJA questions. But it's also really helpful for us to know, are we reaching the population that we want to reach? Are we reaching? Are we accomplishing the things that we want to try and accomplish with the people that are really going to be in charge of changing things? And so that's really helpful for us. And then the survey that you see on the screen is our satisfaction survey. So that's one of the questions that the BJA is going to ask, is they ask all these questions in one form or another, and this provides us with the answers to that. And then, as I said, it helps us as an organization know, are people satisfied with the training that we're doing, or is there something that we can be doing better? And on the back of our form, we do have an open-ended question part of this that says, do you have any other recommendations or anything else you would like to see in this program, so that we can get some of those other answers that may or may not be tracked on this survey.
Hey, let me interrupt you for a second and ask you, what do you guys do to improve responding? Because I know that often people really don't like surveys, or they don't want to take the extra time it takes to do them. And so you may get only responses from a couple of people who either really loved it or really hated it.
Right, yeah, and we definitely, yeah, so I think a lot of it, and I know like Rebecca can speak to this a little bit too, because she's definitely been the person to make sure that everybody's doing the evaluation. But I think for us, a lot of it comes down to the timing that you hand it out. And so for us, we do a full day training or we do a 2-day training. We're going to hand this out like a good probably 30 minutes before the training ends, so that people have time to like sit there and read it. And then we basically are like, well, like as they're leaving the room, it's like, well, did you have your survey? And they're like, oh, no, I forgot. I was like, okay, can you do that real fast? Thank you so much. And I think another big part of that is that this survey is very short and it's very concise. So we ask 7 questions, and that's all you have to answer. If you don't want to write in any additional information, you don't have to. We just ask that you answer those 7 questions. And again, they're very clear and understandable, so that it doesn't take a lot of time. People can just kind of be like, did this training meet my objectives? Yes or no? And like on what scale? And so that is a big part of getting people to answer your surveys, is not making them very long. How many questions do you really need to ask? Because all of us, we've all taken surveys that go on and on and on. So we want to make sure that we're asking.
Or drive me nuts.
Yeah, exactly.
If you say you ate, now there's another 20 questions you have to answer about the restaurant and all that. So yeah, making it simple, certainly having it, being able, pen and paper is sometimes a pain for collecting the information, but having it, be able to hand it to someone and look them in the eye and say, hey, please do this, maybe up the odds of it. If it's a larger group, or even like these webinars that are not in person, where you don't have the opportunity, I don't know, I've heard people talk about, giving surveys and stuff, timing it with giving the participants something, giving them food at a break or whatever, that when they'll I just gave you that, so you can give me the survey response. It's something. I know in our local court here in Pittsburgh, they were actually collecting some, I guess you could call it satisfaction information. They invested in some technology and got these interesting little kiosks that they were testing several different forms. But the first ones they tried, they just had as very simple a smiley face, a frowny face, or a flat neither in the middle face, and they had a single question, sort of rate your experience in court today or whatever it was, to get an idea of how people were reacting. And it was very interesting to get different patterns of responses for different courts, different days when different things were going on. So very simple, very, very simple. Raised as many questions as it answered, but so I think they ended up maybe selecting something with a little bit more flexibility to ask a couple questions at least, rather than just the I'm happy, I'm sad.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's really what it boils down to is how can we get the most amount of information out of the fewest number of questions? And it's going to be different for every program and every organization. But I know that, as a technical assistance provider through the BJA, these are definitely questions that they want the answers to. And this is the way that we've been able to, up to this point, do a really good job at collecting that information. So, all right.
So we had this little funny funny picture, which I think, basically you don't want to be like these guys and not be able to make some improvements. Collecting data, information to inform what you do, to make sure that what you're doing is what you think you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. Why not take the time to take the blocks off and put the wheels on so you can move forward more easily, because it's going to make your life so much better. I totally love that picture, the little Lego guys.
I know.
Do you have any thoughts about that? When you first saw that picture, what did it make you think of?
Yeah, I think for me, I think people get so their heads are so, especially in a very project-based organization, your head is so much in your project, and you kind of leave your data person to be your data person. And for me, this is kind of like, all right, let's take our head out of our projects and let's understand how, like, the wheels that this guy has will make our project infinitely easier.
Yeah, and also maybe that he might be the data person and everybody else is like the program people, and they don't, because I think you're right. Sometimes we put all that in one person and then we isolate them and keep them kind of separate from everything. We do a national data collection for the Juvenile Justice Agency called the National Juvenile Court Data Archive. And we bring together the data people so that they can talk to each other, because often they are very isolated within their courts. They're just keeping the machine running, and nobody really is asking them their opinions about things or giving them training opportunities to do stuff better. So it's that isolation can be a problem. Have the multidisciplinary teams that are optimal for a continuous quality improvement process would get all these guys talking to each other.
Definitely.
So yeah, the other things that you can do to improve data capacity, certainly building a team around that data person, taking time to assess what is your current data capacity, and taking a moment to plan, well, we need better information here or about this, this aspect of our work. These are things that we've worked with juvenile justice courts and agencies, and we actually have a sort of a self-assessment thing that we developed to go with that model data project, which there's a link at the end if people are interested in that. Certainly looking to identify what are measures and necessary data elements, how you're going to define those things, and again, make sure that everyone has a common understanding so that the data can be collected with, in a quality way. I always encourage data sharing. If you're the court, share some information, at least, at an aggregate level, to let folks know what's going on, and vice versa. If you're a program, the court might like to be informed, and not the data sharing doesn't have to be just on that individual level, but can be at an aggregate level if that's safer. I know that, a lot of agencies, there's all kinds of reporting requirements from, from tribes to state, to the feds, to the blah, blah, to really develop a vision and a set of boundaries for that stuff. Just because someone comes in and asks for your data doesn't mean you have to give it to them in its rawest form. And I think the initial title of this around data sovereignty, we had a lot of discussions about that sort of thing, that we use sort of a strange thing. Doesn't mean you need to show them your underwear drawer. Show them your wardrobe, not the nitty-gritty details. If there's not some legal requirement to show all the detail. And by all means, there's lots of folks that can provide help and assistance, and they don't. You'd be surprised they don't have to be outsiders or academics that seem to speak a foreign language. I think there's a lot of sort of closer to in-house type of help that organizations can get. I know you had some thoughts on this slide too.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like that you hit on the the sharing of your data, and really considering whether or not how much you want to share and how you want to share it. And I think so much of that goes back to that point that we hit on earlier, which is really, if you have data, you have the power of your organization. And it's really important that you kind of wield that data in a way that's going to protect your organization, but also really help grow it and improve upon it, and kind of share the story of what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it's working.
And I've seen some organizations do that very successfully, even in terms of sharing information about their CQI process. We noticed that this was happening and wasn't, up to snuff, or we wanted to make an improvement in this area, and these are the steps we took to get there, and then here's how we are now. That can be very effective with funders, very effective with the community that you serve, to see that you're not just taking everything for granted. And to the extent that a lot of justice system stuff involves tax dollars, a lot of tax money goes into paying for the data collection, and I'm a big believer that the public should get something back. They paid for it. So if somebody else is covering my salary, I feel like I need to give them a little something back. And it doesn't have to be, everything, and it doesn't have to be at the most detailed level, but this is why a lot of organizations do really nice annual reports that include some statistics, some numbers, some sense of the data, if not actual evaluation, that sort of CQI process at least summarized for them. What do we have?
Yeah, definitely. So as we're wrapping up, there's a couple key points that I wanted to hit on. Just kind of a quick review is, there's a lot of reasons why you want to measure and why you want to evaluate, and they're both internal and external. Part of building a team around your data person, and part of doing an evaluation is to keep employee morale up, and is to help motivate people, including yourself, in the organization in doing what you're doing. Some of our successes can be really small, and so it can feel overwhelming. And so it's really important that when you have that data, that you're helping to share that information with your organization. Not only does it help motivate, but it also just helps people understand, are they doing a good job, and are there areas of improvement that they can work on. And so the next thing is help develop SMART goals. So really having goals that, will help us measure in the long term, will help us figure out clear and concise ways that we've been able to really accomplish our goals. And again, to know that what we're doing is really doing more good than harm is always really important, and how we're doing it and how we're going to measure it. CQI, we always want to make sure that evaluation and measurement is not a one-time thing. It's something that we continuously do, because our programs they're it's like a live organism. Our programs are something that they keep evolving, and everything's going to always shift, and everything's always changing. And so we want to make sure that, as the shifts are happening, as our organization's growing, that we're growing it in the best way that we possibly can. And as Melissa was saying, evaluation doesn't have to be a foreign language. Data doesn't have to be a foreign language that, only evaluation and data people can understand. It's something that can be easy, and it is definitely digestible for all of us. So last, just some of the 10 key measurements that we had mentioned a little bit earlier, but, we're talking about attendance. So we're talking about how many people are coming through your program. That gives us a good number. And who are they? For the BJA, is it federal employees or is it non-federal? And for your own program services, it helps us figure out, are we reaching the people that we want to reach? Why are they coming to your program? What's the need there? Is there, what gap is your program filling? And, especially with courts and with some of the justice stuff, we want to know what's their history and why are they involved? Like, is there a trend here? Is there a bigger issue at hand? What can help us inform how to provide better care? Another thing we always want to consider is our program fair? Is it treating everybody equally? Is it treating people the way that they deserve to be treated? And that's very true, especially for, a lot of justice and a lot of social services. And what changes happen as a result of your program, both short-term and in number 10 you'll see in long-term. What did your program do? What did it accomplish? And really, did it meet their needs? Did you reach success with that person? And what does that success look like? Something that's really helpful, especially for planning the next time around and really developing and growing and strengthening your program, is really getting feedback from the people who are coming through your program, who are coming through your courts, and understanding, what was their experience like in your program, especially if we're talking about something like having a trauma-informed court. You walk into a court and if it's a bunch of just like cold chairs that are hard and the entry room is dirty, that's something that's not going to help people feel less stressed when they're already stressed because they're in court. So what is the experience like? Maybe there's these little outside things that we would have never thought of because they're not directly related to our program, but that can really help strengthen our program overall. And then, of course, we always want to know, how much does the program cost? How much does it cost overall? How much does it cost per person? If there's a way to calculate how much money is it saving, those types of things, especially for funders, can be very important and really convincing. And then, again, what are the long-term impacts of your program? What, 5 years down the road, did your Healing to Wellness court help keep these people from recidivating? Like, is there a way that you can measure that long-term impact? So those are just some of the questions that we want to keep track of that will really help us report out to our funders and to the BJA, but also strengthen our programs in-house.
I think there was a little animation here. So definitely want to encourage you all to, to take the time, if you want to take some time now, to think of 1 or 2 things that you can do right when you get off this webinar to start making improvements, to start being SMART, as under the acronym. If you're ready to make a commitment, maybe note them in the chat. Tell us what your seed is going to be, or how you'll nourish your sapling, because I think there is something very powerful about making a commitment. I recall hearing somebody who had done some research, I don't know the citation for it, but that if you tell, if people say the words "I promise" or "I commit," it's almost like signing your name to something. You're more likely to actually do it. So if there's any of you that are brave to just even have that first step, or even suggestions for the others, we won't hold you to it. We're not going to come and quiz you later, but it's a good way to just to kind of own it a little bit. And I think one of the things that that I will do as sort of my little commitment is on the next slide here, some resources. If you want to get some more information on continuous quality improvement, we have a series of little one-page, two-sides overviews, and then a larger document that is a real how-to guide. The Model Juvenile Justice Data Project, there's information about it, including the data self-assessments, which were designed for juvenile justice, but I think without a whole lot of thinking could be stretched or modified to cover just about anything. The Juvenile Court Data Archive, if anybody is interested in that, there's a lot of detailed information there about what state juvenile systems are collecting. The statistical briefing book certainly has a ton of information. If you're not juvenile justice, it might not be that thrilling for you, but there is population data, data on kids in the system, and there's just tons of information. And the council's ICWA bench book, I know, gets a lot of use, and we get some sort of calls for help sounds wrong. Emails requesting information about ICWA all the time, so that's something that is just out there in the interweb, as it were, for people to get. Jessica, will the slides you said will be archived so people can wait and get the links, or is it something they can download sooner?
Yeah, so what we do is that we post the webinar and the resources on the websites for both us and NAICJA, and folks can go back and review them, and of course we will send out a link to that to all of the participants of this webinar when it's over.
Excellent. That's all we got, I think. Oh wait, one more.
There we go.
Did anybody have any questions? Everybody was very quiet on the chat.
All right, so Rebecca, we're going to ask you to give us a formal farewell, and we'll wrap up.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Kate and Melissa, for that very interesting and super informative presentation. I've heard Kate speak now 3 different times, and she's never repeated herself, so thank you. Before we conclude, I just want to take a moment, and it's data too, so I just want to take a moment to talk about NAICJA and our work in tribal communities. For those of you who are new to our webinars, NAICJA is a tribal justice professional organization whose goal is to build and enhance tribal court capacity. We do a pretty broad range of work for tribal communities, including training and technical assistance to support tribal courts. We're also TA providers for the Bureau of Justice Assistance, CTAS Purpose Area 3 grantees. Another part of our work is the Tribal Access to Justice Innovation website. This website allows us to highlight and share different programs in tribal communities. If you know of a promising program, let us know about it. If it's not already highlighted on our website, we can go ahead and share it. That website is tribaljustice.org. Altogether, all lowercase, tribaljustice.org.